Yeah, very, very important question. I think the key word there really is risk.
Yeah.
We do know that we have low intakes on average of some vitamins and minerals in the UK, but for some of those, because of the limited sort of scientific evidence that we have for setting the reference values for those, we're not entirely sure what the actual implications of that might be in terms of health for some nutrients, such as maybe magnesium or selenium. But having said that, there are some that are potentially of public health concern. We could mention, if you think about iron, for example. We do know that in the UK, sort of adolescent girls, so sort of like 11 to 18, they almost 1 in 10, and about 5% of women as well, that adult women, fall below the threshold for iron deficiency and anemia. And so again, iron is something that is typically more bioavailable from animal sources, whether that's meat or other sources, than it is from plant-based sources, and it can be absorbed and utilized more easily by the body. So that is, I think, one thing to look up to think about. And you mentioned milk alternatives or dairy alternatives, and I think iodine is a nutrient that perhaps many people don't really think about much, or that in this particular case, I think is one as a nutritional lookout, if you like. At the moment, about a third of our intake on average comes from milk and milk products. And so if we're choosing dairy alternatives, either some or all of the time, for whatever reasons, whether it's, as you said, whether it's just for personal preference, if it's because of dietary requirements, or just to try something new, I think it's a good option to try and look at those that are fortified if possible, and you can check on the back of the label and see what it has there. So it may be, for example, with calcium, B12, but I think also iodine is another one that's important as well, where we do have some evidence to suggest that iodine deficiency may be a bit of an issue amongst women sort of that are sort of 16 to 49 in the UK, and that they might be below the threshold for iron deficiency. Fish and shellfish are really, really good sources of iodine, but unfortunately in the UK we don't really eat a lot of fish or seafood typically on average. So I think that's another one. And then I think one that maybe doesn't relate quite as much to the shift in our diet, but more broadly, is vitamin D.
Yeah,
and that's of course had a lot of interest throughout the coronavirus pandemic. But that's one that we can all be thinking of as well. And at the moment, in the winter months, we should all be, everyone sort of 1 year and over should be aiming to have or be given 10 micrograms per day as a supplement. And that's to protect bone health.
Yeah, and I think we're realizing a bit more about vitamin D as well. So bone health, certainly to reduce the risk of fractures, but also the possible immune supporting benefits as well. And emerging as well, we don't know the link possibly, but there's possibly something to do with maybe mental health, when we're not sure. It's an emerging nutrient, mineral, isn't it? We're not sure yet. The science isn't quite robust yet, but there's it's certainly something we should all be thinking about through those winter months from October all the way through to April. And being honest as well, on the months that are from April through to October, those summer months, realistically, I think the guidelines, we had Professor Susan Langham-New on another episode, and she was saying, it is about 20 minutes exposure every day, about 10% of your body uncovered, and therefore, you won't be able to generate the vitamin D through clothing or sunscreen, moisturizers, all that kind of thing. So we kind of have to think, although we think we're doing okay in the summer months, but how many of those might be in a workplace? How much time do you spend outside of your workplace, in daylight? And if it is in a city or a town, you may be outside your building, but it's the shadows from other buildings around you. So don't assume that just because it's April to October, if you're in the UK, that you're safe. You may not be. And you can ask your GP. It's a very simple blood test, and if your GP is perhaps not so willing to test, you can also do it yourself privately. I think it's about £30. There's an NHS lab in Birmingham that does it, that can send vitamin D kits out to people. But do check with your doctor first. It is quite important that we do have, you know, reasonably good vitamin D levels, because the best source is the sun, and we just aren't too good with that in the UK, really. Food sources, egg yolks, oily fish, really good, but not nearly enough that we need. So we do need a bit more of the sun. And yeah, so I agree with all of those that you said. Absolutely, Simon. B12 as well. For a lot of people, B12 is a deficiency as we age. And also,
yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I think it definitely, yeah, is an area to look at more. I think one of the issues in terms of what we see around, you know, around B12 and also folate as well, or folic acid when it's given as a supplement, is that a lot of the trials that have given these B vitamins to look at sort of cognitive decline and things like risk of dementia, is that the evidence is quite inconsistent or maybe conflicting. And so there are the studies showing that there's definitely appears to be an association between lower levels of, well, B12 and folate, because they both work together in the body as we get older. But at the moment, we don't really have very strong evidence to suggest that there's really a clinical benefit of supplementation for the B vitamins.
Yeah, and I think that part of it as well is this knowledge that as we age, I think we produce less intrinsic factor in our stomach, which apparently makes it more difficult to break open and therefore absorb the B12. So you may well be eating the same amount dietary wise, but you're not absorbing as much as perhaps you once did. So again, simple blood test from your doctor. If our audience are feeling tired and lethargic, anemic possibly, absolutely go and check it with your doctor. It's very simple blood test. They'll test your iron, your B12, your B9, etc. And it's easily rectified. So do reach out for that if you are feeling more tired than you think you should